Chapter 20. I ran up the stairs two at a time, holding the book from the library, the one with the essay contest printed on the inside of it. I couldn't wait to tell my parents. Before I could open my mouth, my mom looked at my book and frowned. Another new book, she said. You should be spending time doing math, something you can actually get good at. Then she became all nostalgic. You know, when I was your age, I used to eavesdrop on my brother's math lessons. Yeah. I didn't have time for this. I'm not you, Mom, I exclaimed. The words just came shooting out of my mouth, and my mom flinched. I'm sorry, I just mean, maybe I like something else. Like what? She asked. She put her broom down and crossed her arms. I bit my lip. Like writing? English writing? She asked, like it was the most preposterous thing in the world, like I just said basket weaving or something. I nodded. You heard Mr. Yao. You gotta be native in English. And I'm sorry, but you just are not. Mr. Yao? Since when did he become an expert on anything other than meanness? You can, however, be native in math. I don't want to be native in math, my mom frowned. You're not getting it, are you? She said. She sat down on the bed and looked at me, deep in my eyes. You just can't be as good as the white kids in their language, honey. It's their language. My gaze sank to the floor. As I dragged myself out of the room, my mother called after me. Someday you'll thank me. She's wrong, I told myself. She was wrong to the power of infinity. I thought about picking up the phone and calling Lupe, but instead I flipped on the TV. A rerun of The Simpsons was playing. I stared at Marge Simpson with her big hair and easygoing smile. Marge, to me, was like the perfect American mom, so warm and forgiving that even if Bart was setting the house on fire, she'd continue chatting with her sister on the phone. Maybe he just needs a little more love, she'd say. Sometimes I wondered what it would be like to have an American mom, just for a day. I could eat all the chocolate chip cookies I wanted because American moms on TV were always baking them, or making casseroles, or organizing birthday parties with themes. I'll tell you what they're not doing. They're not pestering you about doing your math. Whatever. I'll show her. She didn't even have to know about the essay contest. One day, it'd just be like, hey, can you pass over the chopsticks? And oh, by the way, I want a motel. Mr. Yao's car roared into the motel and interrupted the daydreaming. I flipped off the TV, and he and Jason walked up to the front desk. It's important, son, that you understand every part of the family business, Mr. Yao said to Jason as they stepped in. But I don't understand why we have to do this now, Jason protested. Do what now? I asked. Mr. Yao lifted up the front desk divider so that he and Jason could join me behind the desk. Today, Jason's going to do your job, Mr. Yao announced. He's going to check customers in. You've got to be kidding me. Jason was not a natural checker-inner. For one, he didn't have good customer service skills like me. No surprise there. But he also had basic problem figuring out math. So it's $20 a night plus tax, he told the customer while his father watched and as I stood behind them. The customer gave him $100 bill and wanted change. Jason struggled to calculate the tax, which in Anaheim, California, was 13%. Do you have a calculator? He asked me. It's $22.60, I told him. I'd checked in so many people by now. $22.60 was tattooed in my head. Don't forget, I need 2 rooms, the customer reminded him. Right, Jason said, and pulled out his hand and tried to do math in the air with his finger. So that's 2 times 22.66, Mr. Yao yelled at him. You can't figure out what that is? Hang on, just give me a second, Jason said, and he bit his lip. You can carry the 1 and then add the... Mr. Yao shook his head and stomped into the manager's quarters. After Jason finally figured out the math and gave the customer his keys, he went in to find his father, who was in the kitchen. I did it! I checked in my first customer, Jason told his dad proudly. His father didn't say anything. Well, how'd I do? Jason asked. Mr. Yao breathed in and out, looking like he was trying to contain a wildfire, and was failing. How'd you do? You were awful, a disgrace. All that using your fingers to do math. What are you, 5? Jason's face burned beet red. Your math isn't even as good as a girl's. Mr. Yao spat the words at him as his eyes opened, as he eyed Jason up and down. God, you embarrass me. It was his first time, I said in Jason's defense. Yeah, well, he screwed up, Mr. Yao growled. He stared at Jason long and hard to make sure his words sunk in. I looked down. I could see the whites of Jason's knuckles. Afterward, when Mr. Yao went out to talk to my parents, I walked over to Jason. He was sitting all by himself in the corner of the front office. I knew exactly what he was feeling because I felt like that the first couple of hours, because I felt it just a couple of hours ago when Mom yelled at me. It's okay, I said softly. Jason shook his head. Don't, he said. I put my hand on his shoulder anyway, and he jerked his body away. Just don't. Chapter 21. Pounding woke us up at dawn the next day. Ear-splitting pounding, like someone was attacking the front office door with a jackhammer. I jumped out of bed. Mr. Lawrence, one of the customers from the night before, was standing in the front office. Quickly, my dad busted him in. My car! Mr. Lawrence shrieked. It's gone! Mr. Lawrence's neon green Ford Thunderbird had been taken in the middle of the night. He had parked it right in front of his room 5, and when he woke up, it was gone. We have to find out who did this, I said, turning to my parents. You think it was one of the other customers? I immediately grabbed the customer login to see who stayed here last night. Could have been anybody, Mr. Lawrence said. Somebody could have come in here in the middle of the night and taken off with my car. I made a mental note to add parking lot gate to my wish list. My father picked up the phone. Hello, Mr. Yao, my dad said. Something terrible has happened. Mr. Yao arrived half an hour later. How could this happen? He said to my mom and dad, gesturing angrily with his hands. We don't know, my dad said. We were just as surprised as you. Mr. Yao picked up the phone and called the police. After that, he went around from room to room, waking up all the customers. Have you seen a green Ford Thunderbird? He asked them, peering suspiciously into their rooms. One of the guests said he did hear some noise around 3 a.m., like someone was trying to start a car. Mr. Yao turned to my dad. Did you see anyone leave here at 3 a.m.? He asked. My dad sheepishly admitted he didn't know. He had been sleeping, to which Mr. Yao frowned. Stop sleeping! Mr. Yao then asked us if there were any customers who left without checking out. My dad and I went to check if anyone had gone in the middle of the night, and sure enough, when we went around, we found 5 keys. We gave Mr. Yao the numbers of the rooms of the names and the names of the customers. Mr. Yao wanted to know what the customers looked like. I tried to describe them the best I could. So let's see, Mr. Roberto had a mustache, I said, but it wasn't one of those long, archy ones. It was a small and tidy one. And Mrs. Robinson was about the same height as my mom, a little taller. I closed my eyes, trying to recall any other details about her. She had long, curly black hair past her shoulders, not in braids like some other black women, I said. Mr. Yao's eye bulged. Wait a minute. She's black? He yelled. I thought I told you about not renting to black people. My throat went dry. I could hear the sound of my breathing, hard and fast. You said bad people, not black people. Any idiot knows black people are dangerous, Mr. Yao said. That's not true. I was stunned. Hank's not dangerous, for one. I narrowed my eyes at Mr. Yao. You're the one who's dangerous. Maya, my dad said nervously. My dad turned to Mr. Yao. Sir, we can't judge someone based on their skin color. It isn't right. This is America. Mr. Yao snorted. If you really believe that, you're the dumbest people I've ever met. Dumber than I thought. Clearly, you have no idea how this country really works. The sound of police cars pulled up. What's going on here? The police officer asked when they stepped in. There were 2 officers, both male and white. They had lots of things on their uniforms. Sticks hanging from their belt, radios, walkie-talkies, which they talked into when they walked in the front door, and guns. I stared at their guns. Mr. Yao filled them in on what had happened. From the familiar way they talked with him, it seemed as if they knew him. I wondered if the cops had been to the Cala Vista before. Mr. Yao handed them a list of customers who had left in the middle of night. He told them he thought it was Mrs. Robinson who stole Mr. Lorenzo's car. He went so far as to circle Mrs. Robinson's name and write down the word black next to it. And where is Mrs. Robinson now? The officers asked. She left. I really don't think, I started to say. The officers cut me off with a sharp shh. They only wanted Mr. Yao to answer. Mr. Yao proceeded to tell the officers about the customers, and they seemed particularly interested in hearing about the Weekleys. Are they home? Can we interview them? Absolutely, Mr. Yao said, leading the way outside.